It had been a very long time. At first, I'm sure there was a lot of hope in the people that there would be an immediate rescue from their plight. It was so hard to be taken out of the life that they knew. Jerusalem was home. Their God-given home. The rumor was that there was still a significant remnant of persons back in Jerusalem, but for all they knew, those people now living in Babylon were, for all intents and purposes, cut off from all of that. But what Isaiah's people knew was that there were aliens. They were the aliens. And they were living in a culture that was counter to the one that they had known and loved and understood. The God they once worshipped, the God of Isaac, Jacob, the God of Abraham, the living God, seemed distant now, if not entirely gone. The faith which had once placed God in the very center of their lives was fading away little by little as each successive generation came to fullness of life. They remembered a little less with each generation the story, the faith story. That faith story was one of God's promise to never forget the covenant and how God called ordinary women and men to live into a vision of a healed and a transformed world. Against tremendous odds, those faithful people heard God's call, heard God's leading in the midst of their lives, and they said, "Yes, Lord, I see it. I will go." The salvation story included a powerful tie also to the land in which they lived. There must have been some in Babylon who still remembered and told that sacred story. I have an image of sometime around sunset at the beginning of a new day that folks would gather around as someone told a story. One of the old ones told stories about God's promise and God's steadfast love, even when human beings turned away. And it wasn't easy as young people began to follow the ways of Babylonian culture, leaving their own faith story behind. That faith was a faith that spoke of a steadfast, loving God, and all of a sudden, for the young folks, it seemed irrelevant to their lives. Perhaps at times, in those in-between times, it was enough to keep telling the story and waiting patiently for God to keep the promise, to renew it again. Does any of this sound familiar? Could it be that as we have lived through the end of the age of Christendom, that we have now found ourselves as strangers, as aliens, in a land with habits and practices that are counter to our faith, to our story? Even more, have we been less than faithful in telling the story, either out of fear or out of neglect? Whatever the case, it's not being told. And so the culture that once embraced the church now wonders if it is still relevant. In the midst of all that brokenness, the separated families, the loss of hope, the loss of land, the loss of their homes, God sent one named Isaiah. Isaiah was called to remind God's people first who they were, and then why they were, and then to announce that God was about to do, you know what that is, right? A new thing. Isaiah listened for God's leading and stood before the people and spoke of God's new thing, which was truly a vision of hope for a healed and transformed world. He began with the words, "Fear not, I've called you by name. You are mine." The issue wasn't fear, although the term "fear not" was used. It was really that these words were words of assurance. It was a way of saying, remember the covenant. God hasn't forgotten God's promise, and that God has given us a name and a place and a purpose, and we will not be abandoned. And although human effort alone cannot fix the world, God can. God can. And so Isaiah 43 almost cried out to us on the vision team as we try to discern God's leading from the written word. The text spoke of a journey from what is to what will be. And God spoke of waters that would not drown them when they came, or fires that might cleanse but never consume them. Isaiah reminded the people that God called them to be witnesses, to tell the story of God's law and creative power. God wanted the people to know that God was about to do a new thing, and that they should, in Isaiah's words, not remember the former things as anything other than a part of the journey towards the new. While remembering that story was important while they were in exile, it was time now to follow God's leading to a new place, in a new time, with a new vision and a renewed mission. So here we are, in an awesome sanctuary. I wish I could fit one of those windows in my retirement. Aren't they? We are gathered here, gathered from a large part of the state of Pennsylvania, as United Methodists who have been blessed with an invitation from God to join God in a new thing, to be co-creators of something new. Like much of this already historic year, what we begin here today will be part of a very historic moment in the life of the church. We stand here with one foot planted firmly in our marvelous tradition, and one foot testing the waters over in a new place. By God's grace, we have gotten where we are today, and God will carry us into the